All right, folks, a lot's going on in the world, including a lot in the political lane and all along those lines. So Trump is rushing for a deal with Putin, and that leaves Ukraine and Europe scrambling. So definitely that is something that is going on in the news, and which we're hearing about in the news as well. So that ought to be interesting. And I understand that Donald Trump is putting some good news out for Brian Donaldson, who is one of his supporters, and all along those lines. And apparently, Brian Donaldson is running for Florida governor, and apparently, right now, it looks like he's doing well. So at least that's what Donald Trump was reporting, and all along those lines. So that ought to be interesting to see if a supporter of Trump doesn't do well in the race, and all along those lines. So it does look like that is something that folks are paying attention to, this whole notion of who could be the Florida governor, and all along those lines. So it ought to be quite interesting to see what goes on in that space and how folks react to this news of there being a new leader in that world, and all along those lines. So maybe if you run for office and you or support certain candidates, you might get to be the whole notion of the whole governor of that big state of Florida. So Trump shares polls showing Donald's leading then the race to be the governor of Florida. So he tweeted that on yesterday, which would have been the 17th. So President Trump is touting an internal poll that is showing Representative Brian Donalds, Republican from Florida, leading in a hypothetical Florida governor's race. So Trump touted the poll, which was conducted by the Florida-based Republican pollster Victory Insights, in a post on Truth Social. The poll showed Donald leading a hypothetical Republican primary field with 31% support. Lieutenant Governor Jeanette Nunes trailed at 4% support, followed by the state's agricultural commissioner Wilton Simpson at 3% support, and Miami Mayor Francis Suarez at 1% support. So no one has jumped into the Republican primary for the state's gubernatorial race, but Donalds has told a number of Florida Republican donors that he plans on launching a bid. So apparently he's planning on launching a bid, and Sampson and Nunes have been floated as potential candidates for the position as well. Trump's endorsement will likely carry a ton of weight in the state's Republican primary, given the president's residency and presence in the state. And Donalds has been a vocal ally of Trump and endorsed him over Florida Governor Ron DeSantis in the state's 2024 Republican presidential primary. So Donald sat in Trump's box during the Republican National Convention last year, and last month, Trump gave Donald a shout out at the inaugural parade. Stand up, Byron, Trump said at the parade last month. What a future this one has. So apparently he's really backing that particular candidate, and all along those lines. So that's something that I did see in the news, in the political landscape. And we do know that Rick Rosner, who is with me on this particular evening and everything, has got some questions about the way that polls are conducted, and all along those lines and in that space. So I'm definitely going to be interested to see what Rick has to say about this latest news and everything like that. The other thing that I was telling my one of the co-founders of this network is that there was a recent raid of Indian nationals here in Durham, North Carolina, where I think they picked up like 11 people, and our own Steve Varao was quoted in that story, where he was asking people to definitely make sure that they have their papers in order, and all along those lines. So if Steve joined us, maybe he'll have some thoughts on that as well. But I did see where he was quoted and was in the news in that sense, and all along those lines. I'm going to try to pull up that particular story and see if I can get some more details about that as well, and just see what folks have to say about a number of these situations and what's going on in that regard. So I'm trying to find that article and everything in that space. And by the way, the Department of Education is ordering universities to eliminate DEI programs within 2 weeks. So that is something else that is being reported as well. So definitely they are ordering them to eliminate them within 2 weeks. The United States Department of Education published a letter last week threatening to revoke federal funding for all schools and universities to do not remove all diversity, equity, and inclusion initiatives. The February 14th Dear Colleague letter from Acting Assistant Secretary for Civil Rights Craig Trainer expanded the DOE's interpretation of the Supreme Court's 2023 decision in Students for Fair Admission versus Harvard, which struck down affirmative action to apply to academic programming more broadly. Trainer wrote that educational institutions have 14 days to comply with the new requirements in order to continue receiving federal funding. In a letter, Trainer wrote that the department explained that the Supreme Court, which held that affirmative action policies were unconstitutional, did not solely apply to the use of race in admission. Rather, the letter addressed the use of race-based considerations in any aspect of educational institutions was not legal. If an educational institution treats a person of one race differently than it treats another person because of that person's race, the educational institution violates the law, the letter states. Put simply, educational institutions may neither separate or segregate students based on race, nor distribute benefits or burdens based on race. Additionally, the letter criticized practices by some universities that promote racial segregation at graduation ceremonies and domes, referring to them as a shameful echo of a darker period in this country's history. The letter also mentioned that other indirect DEI programming could be in violation of such legal principles, as these programs frequently preference certain racial groups and teach students that certain racial groups bear unique moral burdens that others do not. The department will no longer tolerate the overt and covert racial discrimination that has become widespread in this nation's educational institution. The law is clear. Treating students differently on the basis of race to achieve nebulous goals such as diversity, racial balancing, social justice, or equity is illegal under controlling Supreme Court precedent, the letter stated. So that's something that was being reported and all along those lines. I'll bring in Rick Rosner and everything. And of course, Kim Calhoun is here. And I'm going to bring up that incident once I can find it that was about the raid and everything. I don't know if I told y'all this before, but I know that way back in the 70s when I was in high school in rural North Carolina, we actually had 3 homecoming queens. So we had a Native American homecoming queen, a European American homecoming queen, and an African American homecoming queen. And even though you can only have 2, because there's a salutatorian and a valedictorian, I do think that they tried to make sure that 2 of the 3 were covered. So there was like a white valedictorian, more than likely the salutatorian would be Native American. Because I think in my graduating class, I think the valedictorian was Gail Rodwell, who was a European American. And I want to say the salutatorian was Arnisha Copeland, who was a Native American, because you can't have, there's only 2 positions, so you can't make a 3rd position. But they tried to divide it one way or the other. So if one was one, then they would try to have the other one be the other one.
Yeah, I grew up in Boulder, which was way too white for me, because it's like 95% Anglo, and I'm Jewish, and that was enough to really be like a 3rd strike against me ever getting a girlfriend. I feel like I was awkward, I was nerdy, and I was not 6'1" and blonde and a ski instructor like my friends were. So, anyway, it was probably better I didn't have a girlfriend, because I was a mess. But you might wonder why in Florida we're not talking about Ron DeSantis, the current governor, running again, and he can't because of term limits. So people are talking about his wife, Casey DeSantis, running. And Republicans like her. She's got 57% approval. People who aren't Republicans think she's creepy. DeSantis currently has 48% approval, 43% disapproval. Republicans are a little bit, Floridians are a little bit gluttons for punishment, because DeSantis, like, he hasn't fixed the homeowners insurance problem, but he has, gone to war against Disney for being woke. So
Yep, then it'll be interesting. Like I said, I didn't even hear her name mentioned in, but apparently Donald Trump wants Brian Donalds to be the candidate and all along those lines. So we'll see if that actually happens or it doesn't happen in that space. But that's where it seems like he is pushing that particular candidate who is a supporter of his to be the next governor. And I think that would be the first black governor that Florida has had and everything should that transpire and all along those lines. But it would be
So Donald's has an iffy past. He, as a younger man, he tried to pass a bad check, but again, all that stuff's been washed away. Nobody cares about that. He's been able to be elected, I think, more than once as a representative. So that stuff doesn't matter anymore.
and that stuff doesn't matter and everything like that. So we'll see how that all plays out and everything like that. We're waiting to hear from a guest that we might be getting in. We've got a new system. There's a QR code. So if you go to that QR code, which you will see, I think it's on your right and everything if you're looking at the TV in a certain kind of way, and you scan that QR code, you can actually call in and ask questions of us in this discussion and any other discussions that we have as well. So you can actually get in touch and bring in your questions using that QR code. I did mention earlier, and I did find this story and everything, that a recent immigration and customs enforcement raid right here in Durham, North Carolina, has aroused anxiety among Triangle's Indian American community doing ongoing immigration enforcement activities. So last Thursday, ICE agents raided a North Durham neighborhood in a targeted operation, detaining 3 men who were suspected to be of Indian origin. Neighbors took video footage of the agents, some of whom were masked and in tactical attire, detaining the men and entering a home. And a total of 11 people were arrested in several raids in the neighborhoods. Residents were alarmed at the tactics of the operation. Alyssa Cullison, who saw strange cars driving around the neighborhood, reported, "We were all shaken up. We couldn't believe what we had just seen." Another neighbor, Ingrid Bretson, described seeing agents swarm a house in a car, saying, "It's insane to watch your neighbors get plucked out of thin air during the middle of the day. That's not normal." And Morrisville council member and a commentator right here on this network, Steve Rao, added that a visa that is expired or an overstay can rapidly change one's legal status, making them subject to deportation. He urged companies to perform comprehensive background checks and check legal documents before hiring. And our own mayor, the mayor of Durham, said he wasn't alerted to the raid until contacted by local media and is now asking for more details on the incident. And this, of course, came on the heels of a recent hoax in which a fake ICE raid at a Durham supermarket already had the community in a state of heightened tension. So you're in California. Are you seeing a lot of these kind of either real or fake raids and all along those lines? And what is your take on this and everything? We also got Jacoby joining us.
I haven't been. I don't think we've had that many in LA, or we've had a lot of protests. They shut down freeway, and at my YMCA, they have these little laminated red cards and I picked it up, and it's your legal rights when confronted by ICE. Mm-hmm. And so you carry the card, and when ICE hassles you, it tells it informs you what they can and can't do, what they can, if they bang on your door, if they don't have a warrant, you don't have to let them in. But yeah, it's on everybody's minds, but they haven't hit LA hard yet.
Well, that's interesting and everything. Hey, Jacoby, I'm glad you've joined us and everything. What is your take? I mentioned that Byron Donalds got some good news that I guess President Trump is backing his candidacy for governor and everything. And now the other head of Doge, or one of the original heads of Doge, is officially entered the 2026 Ohio governor's race. So Vivek Ramaswamy, who is a 39-year-old biotech entrepreneur and former Republican presidential candidate, has entered this race. He filed the paperwork with the Ohio Secretary of State on February 14th and will officially begin his campaign on February 24th in Cincinnati, Ohio, his hometown. So do we think that Vivek Ramaswamy and his biotech background will give a good chance of him being the leader of Ohio and all along those lines? So what is your take of this notion of Vivek Ramaswamy becoming the governor of Ohio?
So we have Byron Donalds, who wanted to take us back to Jim Crow, and Vivek Ramaswamy, who doesn't believe racism is real. yet he campaigned for a guy that pushed the idea that immigrants were eating cats and dogs, pushed the racism. I mean, he has a chance to win because it's a Republican town, or a Republican state, but should he? No, not even close.
Ramaswamy's kind of a charlatan. He's a pump and dump king, where he would buy pharmaceutical companies that had maybe a promising drug, pump up the price, then sell the company, and through this he made billions of bucks.
Yep.
He's actually an American patriot who's going to put Ohio back on the map, okay, and make Ohio great again. And he's pushes the correct agenda, which is to make businesses more efficient and stronger, as opposed to the agenda that's been going on in Washington, D.C. for years, which is just massive giveaways to foreign aid to transgender studies in Africa, foreign aid to all sorts of stupid ideas out there. And so the thing is, what we're seeing is finally some sensibility in Washington, D.C. by draining the swamp and getting rid of all these stupid things that they spend on, including money for NPR, so you get to listen to liberal radio every day, money for PBS, so you get to listen to liberal TV every day. I mean, people are getting sick and tired of it. And you know what they're doing? They're putting the United States deeper and deeper in debt so that you can listen to all the woke agenda out there, and people are tired of it. And that's the reason he will be the next governor of Ohio.
So just to point out real quick, Kim, you're on mute, but just to point out real quick, you said you were happy for Vivek because Vivek was going to bring Ohio back on the map. Well, are you saying that the Republican policies are what put Ohio off the map? Because DeWine is actually a Republican governor right now, so he's trying to replace a Republican governor. So I agree. We should get those Republican policies out because they are the problem in Ohio, which you just stated they were. So just wanted to point out and then on top of that, you parroted the Doge things that they supposedly found, which he put on Twitter. Well, all of those were proven to be false. None of that was. So basically,
it was bad and true.
I want to point out,
you know what's sad and true? When I was in Carnegie Hall, they were giving $1 million to Carnegie Hall of government taxpayers' money. So the people in Kansas were contributing to Carnegie Hall. Okay, that's not a government function to allow entertainment for New Yorkers. And
it generates more revenue for people to go and do things. Without it, we wouldn't. It's kind of like the government building a football stadium in the city or building a baseball stadium in a city. But I'm very concerned about the fact that Elon has access to all of our personal data. And as we have just witnessed, he has posted a judge's daughter's personal information, including her tax records, on X because he got mad because the judge didn't rule in their favor. The judge ruled to ban the freezes that they were doing. I think that this is more dangerous than TikTok having your bank account information, to be honest with you. How rude. Are we too, you know what? Why not just post everyone's personal information, get it done and over with, and then we don't have to worry about it.
That's what you're screaming about. Come on.
I would sue his ass for extortion.
Listen, all you liberals were screaming you wanted Donald Trump's tax return.
Yeah, all right. So if they're posting her, I think they should post everyone.
Other people's tax
Why
return.
don't we get a website? I'll hack into the database on top of Elon, and we'll just share everyone's information. Why don't we just get it over?
Right now when we depend on all this on the internet. So what?
Department of Government Extortionists. I told you this. I said it once. I'm going to say it again.
They're just stopping.
Sue
They're
them.
just stopping this wild woke agenda spending. That's all.
Well,
So
there
I
seems to
want
be,
I want to talk about Ohio for a second.
Yes.
Ohio might be the greatest political state in America right now because it's everything. Because it's a Great Lakes state. It's a hillbilly state because it's up against West Virginia and touches Kentucky, and it's got all these different towns, and each town has its own personality. Columbus, Cleveland, Cincinnati, Toledo, Akron, Dayton, Springfield, Youngstown, and it's like it's the whole melting pot in just one state. So yeah, we should pay a lot of attention to it. But with Ramaswamy and drugs, the deal, pharmaceuticals offers pump and dumpers, scammers 3 bites of the apple because to go to market, each drug has to go through 3 phases of testing, and you can pump up the price for each phase. It goes to phase 1 testing. You tell potential investors we're in phase 1. They invest, and the price goes up before, and you sell before the results come in. You can do it again if it makes it to phase 2, and again for phase 3. Ramaswamy did that with an Alzheimer's drug that went to phase 3, and he sold it before the results came out. He took a $5 million investment, turned it into $38 million, and then bailed before the results came out showing the drug was worthless.
hold on a second. We've been joined by, hold on a second, Nick. We've been joined by Charles Bell, a reporter from Canada, so we can get
So
up to date.
everyone, I would like to okay, go ahead, Mark. Seeing how you're the director, we'd like to introduce to you a newcomer to us who's giving us a report all the way from Canada at the airport where the crash occurred. This is Charles Bell, who's joining us today from Canada. Charles, I'm going to give you the welcome.
Well, good afternoon. It's a sad circumstance, and I don't know if you can see in the background of my shot here.
Yes.
Oh, we can see it. Yes.
That is in fact the wreckage, and it's a really sad event. This is the first time in 20 years this airport or Canada as a country has had something of this severity. The last time was an Air France flight that skidded off the runway very close to where I'm standing right now. But I've been able to get quite close to the wreckage, and you'll be able to see that it's upside down. So there's CCTV footage of the landing. And
We're not getting an image from you right now.
I saw your face earlier, but we don't see it right now.
I think Charles. There we go. There we go. All right.
CCTV footage was captured of the actual landing, and it shows this regional CRJ 700 jet coming in quite heavily. And it's speculation at this point that it appears that the landing gear on one side of the plane failed, and the fuselage rolled. One wing came loose, which you may be able to see in the background of my shot.
Yeah.
I apologize. This is somewhat improvised today, but the response was very rapid. No fatalities, 2 hospitalizations, but of the, I believe it's 70 passengers and crew, all are safe and sound. And the investigation's underway. I was able to be at the press conference earlier today, but the details were quite scant, both from the airport authority, and amazingly, Delta Airlines did not attend the press conference. They operate under a different banner for this airline. Excuse me, just checking my notes. Endeavor Air. Endeavor Air is the name of the subset of Delta that operate this program. These jets, interestingly, though, are made in Canada. They're Bombardier created, and the jet performed extremely well on impact. Fires were at a minimum, and the seating was recently upgraded to a 60G standard, which meant that none of the seats failed on impact. oftentimes, and this is graphic, I apologize to our viewers in advance, but oftentimes the seats fail and passengers accordion together. They receive leg injuries, and it makes it very difficult for them to exit the aircraft. In this case, this is a story about standards and smart governance delivering a great result, a safe result on the day when many people could have lost their lives. So there's a lot of people very, very thankful today that their loved ones are still with us.
Okay. I have a
we
question.
all
I have a question, Charles, about the airport itself, because when I did see the video when they landed, and it looks like they landed on a stack of snow and a stack of ice. Are we sure that in Toronto they didn't clear the airfield, or because it looked to me on the video that they landed in a snowbank? What are your thoughts on that?
And thanks for your question. According to the CEO of the Greater Toronto Airports Authority, yes, the runway was in a wet state, which is a technical aviation standard. So it meant that it was either covered or slightly slushy, but it had been attended to. On the CCT footage, it's distant, but we've had the worst weather in Ontario and Toronto in many years. 2 wicked storms in a row, over a foot of snowfall, and there's been talk about there being 70-kilometer-an-hour crosswinds on landing. Now, at the press conference today, there was dispute about that. Another speaker claimed that, in fact, that wasn't the case. So there's a lot that's up in the air, and the information is quite scant. Some members of the press expressed quietly that they felt the information should have been much more forthcoming. And interestingly, yesterday, at an earlier press conference, the information was so slight that many members of the press were openly challenging folks from the EMS and the Airport Authority and demanding more information. So it's
But if you go look at it, look at the road there. It's like ice and snow, and the thing is, it's really hard to keep those runways clear enough to land a CRJ 700. Which is a small plane. I've flown it a lot. I fly it into Reagan. I even bounced off the runway in Reagan, and they flow around. They're actually a very good plane because they have super great aeronautics. However, if you're landing into a bumpy snowbank, anything can happen. And it looked to me that's what happened. They landed into a bumpy snowbank.
There's a lot that's not clear, but one thing that is clear is why the plane turned over. Because once you lose a wing, the other wing is still flying, which means it's still pushing, and so it would just push the flying of the left wing would just push the plane over because it's still lifting the plane.
Yeah, in this case, Bombardier designed this craft so that the wings would actually break off in this kind of scenario. And that may have saved a lot of lives. The EMS described that a lot of people were suffering from inhalation and exposure to the aviation fuel. So there was fuel throughout the fuselage, but it didn't ignite because most of it disconnected from the fuselage as it rolled. Quite a remarkable story. And again, down to the 16G new standard just brought in last year for the seats, designed to survive a 16G force, and that's substantially higher than the previous standard.
Hey, Charles, just hold on a second.
It's a 3G standard.
Yeah.
So these seats are more than 5 times stronger than the seats from 30 years ago.
I believe so. I believe that's correct.
Hey, Charles, just really quickly, because one of the things that's been reported a lot in North America, particularly in the U.S., is a shortage in both the flight control as well as a shortage in pilots and everything along those lines. So how is it in Canada? Are there enough pilots and enough pilots that are trained in these kind of emergency landings and everything? Because that has been one of the complaints about the airline industry in general, is that there aren't enough pilots that are trained in order to handle these planes in the United States, much less around the rest of the world. But as a Canadian reporter, I was just wondering your take on whether we have enough people trained in order to fly these commercial aircrafts.
Well, it's an excellent question. This is a Delta flight. It did originate in the U.S., and I assume that it was a U.S.-based crew on U.S.-based training standards. Canada has not experienced that sort of problem in our aviation industry. Our training standards under NAV Canada, Transport Canada remain highly robust. And certainly it'll be looked at. But I think more importantly, the protocols for approach and landing for these lighter jets need some inspection. This is a highly unusual weather event for Toronto. Very unusual that we would have this much snow. And you can see even from where I'm standing, it's still quite fierce. So oftentimes flights get scrubbed and pushed to other airports or get given better approaches. This is a busy airport and requires careful coordination, but incidents are vanishingly rare of this sort in Canada. As I say, the last time anything even remotely this serious occurred, and again, there was no fatalities that time, was an Air France flight 20 years ago that went off the runway and skidded off the end, and in nasty conditions. And all passengers made it out safely at that time. The lighter jets in these programs, the C-300 program in Bombardier was actually the precursor to the 737 800, 900 MAX program that Boeing came up with. Boeing launched that program in response to the threat of its competitiveness that the Bombardier C-300 presaged. At the Swiss Air Show around that time, I'm sorry, I forget the year, they demonstrated a test of it. It was a geared turbofan engine and carbon fiber components. And they achieved, I believe it was a 25 or 30% greater fuel efficiency rating over a short flight. Boeing sued at the World Trade Organization and succeeded in getting the program halted, and then brought in the 900 program, the MAX, as a direct result of that. They expanded the length of the fuselage and were able to keep competitive on a per mile traveled basis. The sad fatalities that occurred with the MAX program, it was called I believe the MPAS system. It's not well known that Bombardier charged airlines for that training program, for that new system. So the 737, and I know I'm going on at length here, but the 737 has an engine cowling that suspends the engine up and forward because it doesn't clear the runway with as much room as a larger jet. When they expanded the fuselage, they needed to correct for that forward mounting of the cowling of the engine with this MPAS system that would correct a nose up flight caused by the engines being farther forward. Well, very sadly, all three of those crashes that occurred were in developing world airlines that chose not to pay Bombardier for the extra training for the MPAS system. Modern G20 countries, G8 countries, all were able to afford the training and none of the incidents occurred there. So these smaller jets have a very interesting history in the aviation community. And no doubt there'll be a lot of questions continuing to be asked.
Yeah,
Absolutely. Wow. It's so is there any concern for other flights coming in after what this has happened? Are they looking into restricting certain planes, or
These two runways are in fact closed for the time being, but other portions of the airport are open. Many flights had to get rerouted to Ottawa and other regional airports such as Hamilton, Ontario. And we can only speculate that they'll remain closed on these runways for some time. The wreckage doesn't appear to have moved at all from what I've seen from CCTV footage of the wreck. And you can see in the background there that the investigation is active and underway. Quite remarkable that all 80 souls on board made it out with their lives when you see the wreckage in person like this.
well, that is
wow,
amazing.
yeah, it just it brings chills down my spine. I've been on a plane before that got hit with side wind, and the wings, I looked out the window and could see the wing inches away from the runway. So I can only imagine having to experience what actually happens when it does hit the runway. What a blessing. They all, I mean, has anyone spoke with any of the people that have been on the plane?
Yeah, there has been interviews in the press, including one individual only 4 hours after the rest. And I just think they're all very, very grateful to be alive. Most of them, several people filmed footage with their phones as they got off the plane. That's the age of the plane. And they seemed truly shocked and amazed that they were able to walk away without a scratch. Notably, the crew on board were very quick in helping passengers off. They risked their own safety to do so, which is commendable. And everyone made it out alive.
I think this is a situation where the pilots should be highly commended for taking this and making it a blessing for everyone, because they had to react in ways that probably no pilot ever has to. What a story. How long are you going to be there?
I'm sorry, say that again. It's a little windy.
Oh, how long do you plan on being there?
Well, I would like to get undercover. It's the conditions out here are quite wicked. It's about 15 degrees below Celsius, and yeah, I will dial back in a few minutes if that's okay.
That's fine. Go get warm.
Go get warm. Go get warm.
Thank you so much, and we look forward to hearing from you again here real soon. Thank you for joining us.
You're welcome.
Okay, guys, what do
Bye
you
for now.
think? Wow, that's a lot going on in this day and time in Canada right now. I wish
I have
Sasha
another
was-
Canadian story that really isn't politics. I just found it amazing. So
Yeah.
my buddy and I were talking about, Elon Musk and a bunch of other people want to put computer chips in people's heads. And we were wondering what that's going to be like when people can communicate brain to brain. And I wondered if there are any conjoined twins, brains are connected. And it turns out there's a pair of 18-year-old twins out of Canada, Krista and Tatiana Hogan, conjoined at the head, and their brains are connected, and they can see out of each other's eyes. They can operate some of each other's limbs. They know what the other one is feeling. They can read each other's thoughts. And I just think that's freaking miraculous. And it's a peek into the future when everybody gets chips and we can think at each other.
Yeah, that could be interesting. Toby, you had some thoughts?
So one with the scary part with the Neuralink stuff and all it'll be interesting because that was always again, gaming stuff has always been about the future, and they've done that in plenty of different video games from Deus Ex on. The scary part is the oversight and actually being able to watch that and monitor that. The big news though, which I didn't hear anybody touch on. And Charles, you didn't even say anything about Thursday's big game. That is the big talk of the town, really, because it's the rematch for the Four Nations.
Oh, well, I'm sure Charles is going to talk to us about that. He's been at the site all day doing reporting on the crash, but I'm sure Charles would love to give us some insight on some of that as well, just to warm up with a little bit. Yeah,
because that Four Nations tournament, the championship game is this Thursday. It's a rematch between the U.S. and Canada, and this time I think it's in Boston, if I remember. So it should be an interesting game, and we'll see what happens because there's no love lost between these two teams right now.
It's a real grudge match. I can share that much. And 3 fights within 30 seconds of dropping the puck is almost unprecedented. It was a tremendous opening few games to the tournament, and a lot of us up here were glued to it. That's for sure. It was a well fought game, and it was Sorry about that. My apologies.
That's okay.
It was a credit to both Canada and the U.S. And I believe it's Sweden and Finland that also take part. Just a tremendous tournament. And hockey's a national obsession up here. Lots of us have lots of stories about our hockey time and people we know. One of my mentors in the business is Mike Boland, who shot an incredible film called The Boys on the Bus with the Edmonton Oilers in the 1980s. And if I could, I'll just dive in with that story. He's actually going to be featured on Mark Messier's series Sevens, which is about the great game sevens in sporting history. And Boland was there for the 1987 victory over, I believe it was the Long Island Rangers, Oilers Rangers. But when they gained access, they went to Glen Sather. And they said, well, we'd like to show up and follow the team around with an RES R7 camera and sound gear for 2 years. No one had ever done anything remotely like this before. And Sather looked at them and he said, all right, you go ahead. But if they don't want you there in that change room or on ice with you, nothing I can do about it. So he left it up to the players. So Boland shows up and he recounted this in his interview for Messier's project that I got to participate in. And he said, we have to go in, we have to ignore Wayne. We have to ignore Gretzky. They didn't talk to Gretzky for 2 weeks.
Really?
And Messier picked up on it. Messier knew what they were doing. He got it. Because Boland said, he goes, everybody wants to know if we're making a film about the Edmonton Oilers or a film about Wayne Gretzky, right? We're going to show them it's about the Edmonton Oilers. Right? So finally, 2 weeks ended, and Mike turns to Gretzky and he goes, well, we were thinking we might do something. And Wayne goes, oh, yeah, whatever you want, no problem. So it's an incredible film. It was groundbreaking. When you talk about embedding a cinema process inside a sporting organization, something where there's a lot happening, a lot of cards being shuffled around, a lot of personalities. Boland proved it could be done. He's an amazing individual. I'm really fortunate to call him a colleague and a friend. But
what were one of the 7 games, by the way? Because you mentioned that they had done this series on the 7 games and everything.
That's a very good question. I was a part of the team that captured the Canadian leg, which was Mike Boland and his sound guy, who's now a producer in LA. And that was for the 1987 Oilers victory that secured the cup. I should know the other ones, but I do not. I have to get back to you on that. My apologies. But that series will get released, I think, reasonably soon. And Messier is an example of dynamic media personality and just cultural leader that's got a lot going on. And it's exciting that they're doing that. I think that sporting stories and it's all about a standard of personal best, and that's Mark Messier. Now, there's stories about him always being the first on and last off the ice. He'd do 10 wind sprints around the ice at the end of any practice, race anybody and beat them, end to end. This is just the guy. In hockey, we call that a moose. He was a moose.
He was a moose and everything.
No. The only moose now is Rantanen, who's playing for the Carolina Hurricanes.
That's right.
So you got a moose out there in the Carolina and everything.
Yeah.
I noticed really quickly, Charles, and I'd love your take on this. We talk a lot in the United States and definitely here on Pod TV about the lack of ownership of minorities and everything. But Canada seems to have gotten past that, because I think the Toronto basketball team at one time had a minority owner, if I remember correctly. It might still have a minority owner. And I know there's been other teams in Canada that have had minority ownership. So what is it about Canada that is allowing minority ownerships in a greater sense than what we're having in the United States?
Yeah, I mean, I think we're really proud of our sporting tradition. Although there are of ownership that is, but there are a few bad spots. So I don't know if you've heard of a little team called the Toronto Maple Leafs.
Yes.
Well, we had a gentleman owning that team for about 25 years named Harold Ballard. And if you want to piss off any fan here, that's all you have to say is those two words, Harold Ballard, right? But as far as the positives go, yeah, I mean, I think in Canada, I think we've got a pretty good balance. We've got a lot of passion for our sports, especially hockey. And as far as minority ownership goes, there's some pretty big money involved in sport in this country. Ed Rogers owns the Toronto Blue Jays, and as far as the basketball goes, the story I'm most proud of is our Nav Bhatia, our super fan. So Nav is a Hyundai dealer in Mississauga, which is a bedroom community of Toronto. And he started going to the games, it has to be 20 years ago. I believe he was at the first one. And he hasn't missed a single game in 20 years.
Wow.
Or more. He's a pretty remarkable individual and a proud example of Canada's standard of diversity, tolerance, openness, multiculturalism, and we're very proud of that. We feel that we've held that standard up as an example of the way it creates success for a community, a society around the world.
Here's the big question, though. This is the big question. Since you're right there in Toronto, and I've been through there numerous times. Matter of fact, my in-laws are in Aurelia right now. That's where they live.
So I'm from Aurelia.
Really? Yeah. So, well,
World.
yeah, it's very small world. You were born. Oh, interesting. Because my wife she's from Fergus, but everybody knows Guelph, but not Fergus. But you're up in that area, so you should know Fergus.
Come on, you got to be kidding me. Your in-laws are in Aurelia right now.
Yep. You know I guess it was that pool hotel, that Best Western or whatever, that has the pool on the inside. It's like the only one in the area right there in Aurelia, off the exit, and then the Walmart's right across the street.
Yep.
Yeah. They live in the neighborhood. There's an apartment complex, a nice neighborhood right behind that.
Come on.
We were just bananas. Up there.
So
for Christmas, we were up there in that hotel because that was the hotel. Since their apartment area didn't have the extra space, they got us that hotel area. We went shopping in that Barrie Mall that's right there. So
okay.
Yep.
Yeah, there's a couple malls, but downtown's the great spot. And so in my family, I come from like my dad was a designer and architect of sorts, and he was all about the old built form of the downtown of Aurelia. And we've got just a beautiful main street there with lots of incredible restaurants, sort of a historic district, if you will. And that right in the center of it, we have an opera house that was built at the turn of the last century. And in the 1970s, there was talk about demolishing it. And fortunately, the community got behind an initiative to restore funding for it. And we started putting shows and music on there. And that's how yours truly grew up. That is a really, really special place, Aurelia. My very close childhood friend is there and volunteers on the theater board that still puts shows on in the center of town. And it's a little slice of what's great about Canada, I'll say that much. What are your in-laws' names?
They are the Bakers. You have Annette Baker and Kim Baker.
I'll be damned. I'll have to ask around, but I bet I know somebody that knows that.
You probably do. You probably do. And like I said, they just came out of Fergus. And I didn't even get to my big question because every time I go up, we didn't go there this time. I've got to figure out how they make those potatoes at the Mandarin. You know, the slices where they put the stuff on the top. I've got to figure that out.
Listen, that's an institution up here. So you got to come up and we're going to go to the Mandarin. Okay. Like it's you don't get out of there easy. Let's just put it that way. It's it's a lot of fun. But we used to have the one we loved in Aurelia was called the Royal Oak, or the Royal Choke, is what we used to call it. But
Okay.
we had a good time.
And everything.
I'll tell you another story about Aurelia, which is that Aurelia is like music town, okay? And I myself am a musician, and I grew up doing music there. And a bunch of us want to get together and celebrate and elevate the kids that are doing music there now. We want to go and give back. You know, I'm in my 50s. Oh, there, I've said it. And a bunch of us, we want to go back there, and we want to do some podcasts and some content and celebrate those kids that are coming up. Because you know what? We had that done for us when we were in our teens and as youth. We had that community get behind us, show up to that Aurelia Opera House. And, you know, I didn't know how lucky I was. And I'm sure, how about yourself? What was your start in media? How did you come by this experience of being in the public eye?
You've been in the forever.
That's a good long story. From the younger years of getting pushed in front of people to speak by my father to getting into improv and getting into doing improv comedy everywhere I could find, and then tapping into a little bit of stand-up and doing some NC work with Mark. And then doing some sports MC stuff, doing some just a whole bunch of stuff. And then I ended up here.
Hey, Charles, just really quickly, just out of curiosity, because you kind of
matter of fact,
and everything. Because I had a quick question for Charles about the music scene and everything. How tight is the music scene? Because, you know, here in North Carolina, we've got the Chapel Hill, Durham, Raleigh music scene. And, of course, everybody knows Austin, Texas, and Nashville and everything. But how good is the music scene, both past and present, in Toronto?
Oh, listen, we're very fortunate as Canadians. We have it's called a CanCon rule, Canadian content, that was brought in the early 70s. And that led to the formation of just incredible acts. Have any of you ever heard of the band Rush?
Mm-hmm.
That was a yes, right?
Yes.
Yeah, so they started in Toronto.
That's one of my wife's bands. I know Canadian band.
What's that?
Well,
you said you're breaking up.
Toby, you're breaking up there.
Oh, I'm sorry. I was just gonna say that that's my wife's favorite band, because coming out of Canada, that was her big thing that she would always talk about.
So here, and they're incredible, right? Now here's a Canada story for you. Two of the biggest bands that I know are Rush and the Tragically Hip in Canadian history. And the lead singers of both of those bands just live on your average street in your average community in Toronto. And they call people neighbors, and they shovel their snow. And I love that about our country. We're very fortunate, very blessed. So Geddy Lee, the lead singer of Rush, used to live right around the corner from us, where we are in the East End of Toronto. But I think it's probably the Tragically Hip that, if you ask about my generation, defines us the best. Mm-hmm. And the lead singer, Gord Downey, he took on our great national issue and crisis of the last 5 to 10 years is Indigenous truth and reconciliation, and our legacy with that. And his brother is a filmmaker who's also in our circle of content creators here, and a great person, Mike Downey. And they uncovered stories, and they elevated that, and they celebrated and shed light on that history. But they also pointed the way forward with, the Canadian values we share, which is love for one another, tolerance, respect, and courage to face problems. And
so it looks like Canada's doing better in acknowledging what was done to First Nations people than the U.S. is doing with acknowledging the same thing with Native Americans. Is that fairly accurate?
I would say that's fairly accurate. And don't get me started on that file. I've been very fortunate to film in Indigenous context in Ecuador, British Columbia, and across Canada. And it's a fascinating and very, very complex subject.
Mhm.
A colleague of mine is Métis. He discovered that this was the case only by subpoenaing his mom's birth record in the
Oh, wow.
state in the US that he comes from about 3 years ago. And I was fortunate to be a part of a series called Political Blind Date here in Canada, where we matched up politicians from opposite sides of the spectrum, conservatives and liberals, liberals and NDP, et cetera. And the show was about demonstrating that you could always find common ground with someone. You might have massive disagreements with them about X, Y, or Z, but you both were in politics because you cared about the country. You cared about the social contract. You cared about your fellow citizens, and you wanted to make a difference. So anyway, I know I'm going on at length.
No,
but-
that's okay. We only got a few minutes to go and everything. You actually need to watch Rick's show because Rick's show is actually very similar. It's called Naked at Night. And
Yeah,
it's
except that,
actually
that we don't find common ground. We just call each other assholes.
But at least you're talking.
But they talk to each other
Rick
and everything
does
like.
the show Naked at Night where they talk politics, and it's just very punchline funny. And
great.
he gets painted while he's
Yeah,
posing.
I used my friend's an artist, and he believes all the Trump bullshit. And I've been an artist model, and we would always argue while he was painting me. So I thought, all right, let's just make it into a show. But I've got a couple Toronto. You guys make good TV up in Toronto. I've got a
Thank
couple.
you very much.
Like there's a show called Working Moms that I think just ended its run a year or two ago. Awesome show out of Toronto.
Thank
There's
you.
a new show called The Z Suite that pretends to be out of New York, but it's really out of Toronto. And it seems like it's a lot of the same people from Working Moms. You have any other Toronto shows to recommend to people?
Yeah, there's a great show called Baroness von Sketch Show that holds the torch up for our Canadian comedy scene, which of course is great. SCTV's here. I can share that there's a biopic doc being done about Godspell, which is the original cast production of Godspell in 1973, featured Victor Garber and a whole load of people that eventually went on to start Saturday Night Live and SCTV, Martin Short, Andrea Martin, Eugene Levy. So they're in the midst of filming that now, and look for that to come out very soon. And we're very, very proud of our history comedy. You know, I think as Canadians, we have an outsider's perspective a bit on our place in the world. We're small but mighty, and it makes us funny. Hopefully funny.
Definitely are funny and everything like that. I know we're getting ready to wrap up and everything along those lines. I do have to teach you because you did not mention one of the premier musicians from this area who's in the middle of a dispute right now. Because every time that I think of the hip hop world, of course, I think of Drake, and of course he's got those ties and everything, and him and Kendrick are going at each other. And by the way, Charles, if you get a chance, check out Red Eye Supply. I have a cousin who is running that company and is of the native background and everything, because I have several cousins that are in the powwow circuit, but he runs a Native American supply company that does like native belts and some of the outfits for the competitions and everything. But if you look up Red Eye Supply, you'll see my cousin Will Hedgepeth is there in Canada, and that is his company. And then Verna Hedgepeth travels the country around the world and in Canada to some degree on these competitions.
Excellent.
Feel free to join us to bring us updates on our morning news from 10 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. We'll send you a link, and people,
I'd be happy to do that.
You know, please, thank you so much for sharing with us what's going on there. It is definitely a sad story turned good, and we need that. We need more of that in this world today, and I appreciate the fact that you joined us this evening to share it. Thank you, everyone. Stay safe.
And don't forget that we have Mama Noni coming up in about 1 minute, so she'll be bringing us some education of African American history, but history in general, even from the African homeland. And she runs the St. Cia Academy here in Durham, North Carolina. So she'll be running in about a minute.
Absolutely. Take care, everyone. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thanks for having me on. Bye for now.
Absolutely. Mark, you got the.
Yeah, if you'll take that one out, because I got to get her started.
Okay. Jacoby, great seeing you. Stay warm. He's frozen. Jacoby, I hope you're not frozen for good. Go get warm. Hey, that was good.
It was very good.